Hey, what's up, guys? This is Adam from the Rescue Michigan Coalition, and tonight we are going to be having a gander at the news conference that Jocelyn Benson gave earlier today. This was, I assume, at the Capitol or at her office or wherever, and she has outlined her concerns with the Senate bills, which is a little weird because the Senate bills were introduced something like, oh, I don't know, 3 weeks ago, which is a little extraordinary that she's only now weighing in on them. Although it actually isn't the first time she's weighed in on them. There was this article just the other day, and this was 6 days ago, describing the 39 bill package as poisonous, and I guess you want to elaborate on that a little bit, or maybe there's some other reason that she thought this would be the time to weigh in. But I'll tell you what, before we get into it, I've just gone online here, and every single one of these I've done so far, we've had some kind of issue with. And right now, I'm not seeing the chat, so let me see. I think there's probably some kind of connectivity issue. Or maybe there's not. Maybe it didn't connect right away. If you are in the chat, just say hello, just so I know that the chat is working. Otherwise, I might need to go into YouTube and see if there's some other way I can see it, because right now I'm just talking to myself. I was hoping we'd have Shane Trejo here tonight, but unfortunately he had another commitment, and I really thought it'd be a lot more fun for this to be interactive. And if I can't see you guys, then that's not going to be as much fun at all. We could still go through it, but if I'm just telling jokes to myself, it's not going to be all that interesting. So we might give it a few moments here to see if people are coming in, but I don't see any messages in the chat. So I think there is something going on. Oh, no, there's a message there. Okay, people are starting to come in. So I guess we'll just give it a little bit more time and talk about some of the things going on. Okay, yeah, I see some people are starting to say hello, so it looks like they are here. So great, thanks everybody for tuning in. This is going to be kind of a lighthearted stream. We're going to actually play the news conference of Jocelyn Benson and kind of go through it line by line. But before we do that, I kind of want to wait a few moments just for some people to come in, because people are starting to file in here. But I didn't know if I wanted to do this, and usually my instinct is if I'm not sure what I want to do, I'm just going to go ahead and do it, and consequences be damned. So we're just going to go ahead and I'm going to have a little comment about the Derek Chauvin case, which is not an issue that the Rescue Michigan Coalition talks about. It's not where we're not an organization about law and justice, and that's not in our issue cluster. But it's not so much the case itself I want to talk about so much as the issues surrounding it, because those do have some bearing on our organizational mission, and I'll explain what I mean by that. Let me start with this point here. If Derek Chauvin was not guilty in the universal truth sense, now obviously he was convicted. That's not what I'm talking about. And people have expressed multiple different viewpoints that I've seen. People who believe he was guilty, people who believe he was not guilty, people who believe that he should have been found guilty on some charges but not others. And everybody is entitled to their opinion. That's fine. And I'm not here to weigh in with my opinion on that case. That's not what I'm talking about. But what I do want to talk about is the issues surrounding the case and what it means when there is a serious question about whether an individual can get a fair trial. Because if Chauvin was not guilty in the sense of the higher power, but was found not guilty, or found if he, let me start this over. If he was truly innocent and found guilty, that's a tragedy. Tragedies happen, and tragedies happen in law all the time. That's not the issue. If Derek Chauvin was absolutely guilty, if in his heart of hearts he intended to murder George Floyd that day, but the jury had found him not guilty, that is the way the justice system works sometimes also. And people are entitled to a fair trial. and the courts still get things wrong. But under no circumstances, not even if he was guilty and found not guilty, is rioting okay. Ever. Violence is never, ever the answer. And even when miscarriages of justice occur, we say all we can do is try to do better as a society, try to educate our neighbors, try to do the right thing. And what happened in this case was an ongoing, real threat to the people of Minneapolis and elsewhere. And in particular, that the jury themselves were exposed to those threats on an ongoing basis. And then on the day of the verdict, no less than the President of the United States himself, Joe Biden, weighing in on the case. That is a radical departure from the rule of law that we all know, that we were taught in school, that we have this thing called the presumption of innocence and the right to a fair trial. And again, sometimes that means guilty people are found not guilty. But that's the system that we preferred over the way it was done in other countries, and in other countries still this day, but I was about to say prior to our founding, where there is no presumption of innocence, where there is no guilty beyond a reasonable doubt standard. And that was what we tried to get away from. And this is what we are being brought back toward. And the fact that this is occurring with the encouragement of the mass media and the encouragement of the federal government and also some lower level governments is profoundly dangerous. And what we're seeing happen already, it's starting. There was a story, let's see if I can find it here. Here's one from the Biden administration, pursuing and getting fired and having arrested an Army drill sergeant because he was apparently defending the neighborhood from someone who has now been committed to a mental health facility after being declared mentally incapable of standing trial to face charges of trespass and animal cruelty. Then there was this story of a deputy being charged, and what were the circumstances of that case? Was, let's see. Apparently, he was shooting at someone driving a car at him, and in another incident, shooting somebody who had a knife. And again, I don't know the facts of this case. You don't know the facts of this case. We all don't know the facts of this case. But the trend that's occurring now, and don't forget, there are still 3 other police officers facing trial in the George Floyd case, is that the mob has decided they are guilty before they are even brought to trial. And with impunity, they will weigh in on the case to the degree that they can. And even if the jury had been sequestered, even if the court did not, even if the jury was kept immune from the pressures coming from the outside world, it's still not okay to riot, to burn down cities, and to kill innocent people. And when this really gets dangerous is when the government begins to sanction it. And when the media is sanctioning it. And that's happening now. And this is not going away. This is escalating. And you all need to understand that what the government is setting up right now is for people that circulate petitions to reform Michigan's election law, to be accused of racism, to be doxxed, to be harassed. And the reality is, the only way to be safe from that is to not get involved. To not get involved in politics at all. Politics is a contact sport, and things sometimes get nasty, and sometimes the threats are real. Here's a story of an officer who was fired after having been caught making an anonymous donation to the legal defense fund of an individual who has yet to stand trial, who is innocent until proven guilty. He lost his job. He was fired because, according to the story, a hacktivist group broke into the GoFundMe website, which is an organization that fundraises for causes that people believe in. And that includes a legal defense, which everybody is entitled to. let me see if I can find in the story here what says. Distributed denial of secrets. What the news media calls a transparency group that hacked into a website, a data breach as it identifies here. They then took the story to the media, and the Guardian proudly announced the identity of the anonymous donor based on the information that was stolen through hacking, which I thought Twitter has a policy against, but evidently not in this case. And the officer was then fired for the act of simply making a contribution to someone that he personally believed was innocent and who was entitled to that presumption. The reality, folks, is that the deep state is encouraged, the radical left is encouraged. They believe that using violence is acceptable, and they believe that using violence is condonable. And you must, if you're going to be involved, have the discipline never to allow those impulses to respond in kind. This is what happened on January 6th. People said, we can't get justice in the courts, we can't get justice in the legislatures, we can't get justice at the U.S. Supreme Court. Let's just riot. What have we got to lose? Well, they've lost a whole lot, and they've damaged the cause immensely. The media responds a little bit differently to one side's violence and the other. Or in fact, one side versus the other, period. Let's not forget when thousands of patriots in Michigan rallied at the Capitol last summer in defense of their freedom, speaking out for their individual freedom that had been taken away in the most radical takeaway of civil liberties in our lifetimes. The governor of Michigan declared they were disease-spreading killers, and even suggested that she might have to punish the state of Michigan for that assembly. And then just weeks later, blithely marched with Black Lives Matter, doing the same exact thing she just condemned our side for doing, protesting peacefully in Lansing. That is the reality that we're dealing with. And the only way to be perfectly safe from that is not to get involved at all. Although nothing is perfectly safe. You aren't perfectly safe. They're taking away our liberties. And if we don't respond politically by defeating the people who have imposed upon those liberties politically, they will be taken away. And nobody is safe in the long run. Watch the video from Viva Frei from what's going on in Canada, where they're under a martial law police state right now because the citizenry has allowed the government to do it. So it takes some courage on your part to stand up to that. And I would encourage people to draw their inspiration from Martin Luther King, who during the civil rights era, Black Americans faced this same sort of terrorism, arguably even worse. Lynchings were a real thing, and innocent people were murdered by mobs. Today, it does not usually come to that. It comes mostly to people having their livelihoods destroyed, like this police officer, who only lost the ability to put food on his table and to feed his family. But what it does have in common with the lynch mobs of those days is the glee and the pride and the arrogance of the people perpetrating those crimes. They're proud of themselves for having outed this innocent person, for defending someone's constitutional rights. They're proud of it because they can get away with it. And all you can do in the face of a perceived injustice, and many people do perceive the trial of George Floyd as an injustice, right or wrong, they're entitled to their opinion, or that or any other of the things that are going on at the state level, at the national level, is to resolve to do better and to resolve to help out to the best degree that you can for the people who are the victims. Like Marlena, who was arrested for opening her restaurant in defiance of COVID-19. That incident should have encouraged more people to respond. But people want to live, people want to be free, and they don't want the government coming after them. But what Martin Luther King taught was, go out and do the thing that you're most afraid of. And you may get beaten, and you may get arrested. But if we all do it together, we'll get through it. And that was the organizing principle that drove the civil rights movement to victory in the 60s. And that's the kind of attitude that we have to have. to be principled, to be peaceful, to be nonviolent, to be resistant when the law is oppressive and brutal, but always to be disciplined and always to channel the suffering that we go through into our own resolve to do more. So, on that note, I said there's going to be a lighthearted stream tonight, and it's time to get there. So we're going to take a look at the news conference that Jocelyn Benson put out today. And again, I say these things, keeping in mind, I just put my name on an email blast that was, kicking Benson a little bit, making fun of her a little bit, because number one of the most effective political tactics is ridicule. And the politicians think so highly of themselves. It's nice to take them down a peg, but knowing also I'm putting a target on my back, and that's just the way it goes. That's what you have to do, because if you allow yourself to be controlled by fear, then you allow the terrorists to win, and that's what terrorism is. Well, it's the illegal application of violence to political ends, but there's also legal terrorism, and that's the legal threats that people may face. And you just have to get through it. There's no other way to get our liberty back other than standing up for what we believe in and moving forward. So, with that said, let's take a look at the news conference from Jocelyn Benson. I got to put my headphones on so I can hear it. I'll pause intermittently and we can just follow along. And yeah, let's give it a go. Let me know in the chat if the volume's not good. And again, folks, I really love interaction, so please feel free to comment and weigh in. I really do enjoy the interactive element of this. So. All right, let's see what we got here. This was 11 a.m. this morning.
Thank you for joining us today. Last week, I was joined by Detroit City Clerk Janice Wynn.
Looks like you guys were hearing it, but not me. Hold on one moment. Let's see. Maybe my headset shut itself off.
Powering on. Yeah, there we
go.
Mic on.
All right, here we go.
And State Representative Matt Kolazar to condemn the efforts of some of our state legislators to take away the voting rights of Michigan citizens as an affront to our democracy.
Well, that didn't take long to get to the first lie, did it? You take away the voting rights of Michigan citizens. Does anything in those 39 bills prevent anybody from voting? No. Michigan has some of the easiest ways to vote anyone in history has ever seen, probably even in our country, having a 6-week absentee voting period. But anyway, let's let Stutter go on here.
With me today are Ingham County Clerk Barb Byram, Senate Elections Committee Minority Vice Chair Senator Paul Woino, President of the Council of Baptist Pastors of Detroit, Reverend Dr. Stephen Bland, and Detroit Mayor Mike Duggan. All of us are united by the common goal of protecting the voice and the vote of every Michigan citizen. Today, my office is also releasing an analysis of the entire package of proposed 39 pieces of legislation, which details the way each one harms our election system or restricts Michigan citizens' hard-fought freedom to vote.
She's going to contradict that in a second, because later on she says half of these, they don't really do anything.
The summary is attached to our press release, which will go out shortly. But here are some highlights. One of the success stories of 2020 was not just that Michigan voters participated in record numbers, but that they had options on how to cast their ballot. Whether they opted to receive or return their ballot prior to Election Day or on Election Day itself, they had choices, and my office worked with clerks around the state to ensure each choice was equally accessible and secure.
Each choice makes the election more complicated for everybody. She's going to be talking a lot about how wonderful our clerks are and how much of a burden some of these Senate bills are going to put on the clerks. Let me tell you something, folks. Every clerk I've ever spoken to and asked any question, their answer is always the same. Ask my deputy. Ask my deputy, because the deputies do all the work. And yet somehow the clerks still will pop out of the woodwork to tell you they are so overworked, they cannot possibly do anything more. Actually, one of the clerks I talked to last year said, we are absolutely overwhelmed with Jocelyn Benson issuing email after email with new rules, new regulations, new requirements, new orders, week after week after week, day after day after day. But these aren't the clerks, these are her clerks. Anyway, let's move on.
In November's election, 3.3 million voters chose to vote absentee. And the fact that our election infrastructure was able to so smoothly and efficiently ensure they all could do so without either widespread fraud or disenfranchisement is a hard-earned achievement that we should be celebrating and working to replicate.
Now, for any of you guys who are brand new to the state of Michigan, we had 20 years of no problems in our elections. In fact, the 2016 election was kind of close. And yet the Democrats had absolutely no grounds for challenging the election, which it's not like they've never done that before. I can think of a few elections. Was it when, well, obviously we know about Bush versus Gore, but was it when Nixon beat Kennedy and they claimed it was an international plot against JFK? I don't remember the details. I'm sorry. I'm not going to go back and look it up, but I'm just saying the Democrats, they find problems with elections when it benefits them. They found no problem in the 2016 election when that was a razor-thin margin. So after all these years of having elections that were just fine and nobody was complaining about, suddenly there was 2020 that was a disaster from top to bottom. The Secretary of State announced before the election, yeah, it might take us a few days to count the ballots this time. Don't know why. Anyway.
But a number of these bills do just the opposite, making it nearly impossible for our clerks to repeat that success in future elections. Why? Here's some reasons. Senate Bill 285 only allows people to vote by mail if they submit a photocopy of their ID with their application, meaning only those voters who both have access to a copy machine and are willing to open themselves up to the very real risk of identity theft are able to request to vote by mail.
Okay, first of all, number one, completely untrue, because they can still do it at the clerk's office for the 6 weeks before the election. And by the way, if identity theft is a concern, is Jocelyn Benson suggesting that people's records are not safe at their clerk's office? They could have their identity stolen from their township clerk's office? Is she suggesting that if you are sending a letter to the clerk's office, a postal employee might open your letter and steal your identity because there's a copy of your license on it? Because doesn't that mean that an absentee ballot couldn't be safe? How do you have this both ways? Seriously, think about this. She's saying you're subject to the risk of identity theft, providing a copy of your license to the clerk. But, of course, providing the ballot to the clerk, that's not going to be a problem at all. We don't need to have any security on those things. So there's that little detail there. Plus, of course, people can actually vote the normal way. There was always that option. Who are the people that can never get to a clerk's office to vote early, can never get to a polling place, and can never, ever make a copy of their photo ID? And by the way, I'm not opposed to allowing them to write their driver's license number on an application, or even to send it electronically. It's easier to take a picture on your phone these days and email it than it is to find a copier. That's true. But to say that you, and I see Martha's comment, a lot of people don't have comments about don't have access to a copy machine. Well, other than the copy machines that are at every retail location all over the state, and the 6 weeks they have to get that done. There is that. And again, as I say, I'm not opposed to allowing people to write down their driver's license number, have someone take a photocopy of it and send it in. That's one thing, maybe. But to say these people can't vote because they can't leave their houses for 6 weeks, that's a little bit of a stretch there.
This includes senior citizens and military or overseas voters who've been voting by mail under our current secure procedures for decades without problems, and would now only be able to do so if they met this new requirement. Yet there's no evidence this change reduces or deters fraud.
Well, the evidence is that absentee ballots allow for fraud. That was the Carter-Baker Commission's finding, was that the number one way to steal ballots is by absentee ballots, and that's why it was restricted. You want to allow overseas voters, the term for them is called UOCAVA voters, and it stands for Uniformed Overseas something, 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 something. Fine, don't let them have to make a copy of their ID. They're 1% of absentee voters, if that.
It actually makes it harder to detect fraud because those seeking to fraudulently request an absentee ballot need only submit a copy of a fake ID to do so. Whereas it's much.
Oh, so you can just submit a fake ID. Well, we all have those. I mean, if she's arguing that absentee ballots have these other fraud problems, that's not working in favor of her argument. That's working against it.
More difficult to forge a signature.
More difficult to forge a signature than to get a fake ID when your policy is to allow any signature to be counted. It's more difficult to forge a signature than to get fake ID. That is rich.
But there's plenty of evidence to indicate that this proposal would limit access for all voters wishing to exercise their state constitutional right to vote absentee. Now, Senate Bill 286 bans the use of drop boxes on Election Day, when, incidentally, they're most typically used, needlessly causing confusion.
First of all, that's not even correct. It was to say that the drop boxes have to be closed at 5 p.m. on Election Day. And I don't think that's correct either, that was the one day they were used the most. And by the way, they were only used in a small number of cities that have, in many cases, like Detroit, multiple clerk's offices. So you have a clerk's office, anywhere in Michigan, you got a clerk's office less than 6 miles away from you. And in Detroit, probably less than 2. So, not that hard. And again, you only have 6 weeks to return your absentee ballot. 6 weeks to get your ballot. I mean, you have to have a pretty bad disability not to be able to walk to a clerk's office in a 6-week period. I mean, it'd be tough, but I'm just saying it could be done.
And raising the likelihood of the potential disenfranchisement and rejection of otherwise legal, valid votes. Senate Bill 287 bans clerks from prepaying postage on absentee ballot return envelopes. Not only.
Yeah, that's taxpayers' money. That's taxpayers' money. And you know, when you prepay an envelope, you pay the cost of postage. If it's not returned, the money's just lost. 50 cents. 50 cents is disenfranchising voters who also have the option to deliver their ballot in person and also have the option to vote in person on Election Day. That's disenfranchisement.
Eliminating another ease of access provision in the current system and infringing on a local clerk's authority, but also creating a poll tax-like requirement that discriminates against low-income voters.
A poll tax, 50 cents. 50 cents was probably the poll tax in 1960. 50 cents is not a lot of money today. I mean, this is getting ridiculous. And to think how this trivializes what Jim Crow laws actually were. To say that 50 cents is a poll tax. If you go to somebody and say, hey, buddy, I got my absentee ballot here. I need 50 cents to mail it. Can you spare 50 cents? That'd probably be a good way to get... That'd probably be a good way to spare change. I got a ballot. I need to buy a stamp. Can you spare 50 cents? Oh, here you go. Here, absolutely. For that, yes. Here, have $2. I mean, come on. This is getting silly.
And again, there's no evidence that doing this in any way would increase the integrity of our already secure process.
No one said it was. It's taxpayers' money you're spending, including some who choose not to vote. Why should they pay for everybody else's ballots? You know, some people choose not to participate in this country. If you have public financing of elections, guess what you're doing? You're forcing everybody in the public to pay for the candidates' campaigns, including people who don't care and don't want to spend that money. It's their money. That's their choice.
There's more. We already require voters who vote in person on Election Day to show photo identification to affirm their identity, with a best practice of enabling those who arrive at the polling place without ID to affirm their identity under penalty of perjury with their signature. Senate Bills 303 and 304 ban this practice. Those voters would be required to vote a provisional ballot, which would not be counted unless the voter provides even more documentation than is currently required by law. Senate Bill 311 only allows military service.
Okay, I guess she's going to move on from there, but let's get back to this point because this is going to be their big one, guys. That people without ID can't vote, and this is discriminatory, and this is racist, and she's going to bring on someone to make that argument in a few minutes here. I worked at a polling place in Detroit in the November election. You know how many folks didn't have ID that showed up to vote? 0. None. I was the ballot box inspector. We had a spindle of the applications sitting there with all the people that looked to vote that day. And I looked through every single one to see, did anybody fill out the affidavit saying they didn't have ID? There was not a single one. 0. None. This is a myth that they're using to attack the voter ID requirement. Because why? Because a signature is easy to forge, especially when they're not even checking them. And that's the only safeguard to show that if someone who shows up to vote is actually the person that they say they are.
Service members overseas and not their spouses or dependents to return ballots electronically using their common access card. However, that's not only problematic because, as any service member will tell you, the common access card use is notoriously unreliable, but also the Department of Defense has not agreed to allow the use of the common access card for voting purposes.
Hey, good, I agree. I don't like the idea of creating a process to allow for electronic submission of ballots. I think that's a road you don't want to go down. So, yeah, hey, Senate Republicans, you know, if she's going to attack your bill and it's not going to be good for our side, why do you do it? I mean, let's look at this news article here. This is from 6 days ago, the last time she was attacking legislation. And look at how the Senate Republicans respond to this. She's going after drop boxes and all this other stuff. Oh, I need to make a correction. It would stop using drop boxes the day before election day. Okay, so they only have 6 weeks to turn in their ballot, or else they take it to the clerk's office. Whoop-de-doo. But anyway, getting back to the argument here. So she's attacking the Senate bills, and they fire back. Look, our package allows for the pre-registration of 16-year-olds and creates another day of voting on a Saturday 10 days before Election Day. We wonder which of these things Secretary of State Benson considers un-American in our election reform plan. Look, guys, you're not going to get anywhere placating the left. They don't respond to that. They will just double down and attack anyway. They'll just ignore it. If anything, they'll take advantage of it. So why even give them this stuff? Why get us all worked up that you're floating the idea of creating an early election day with all of the hazards that entails? To please the left? You think the media is going to back off? Oh, look, this is a moderate package. Look, they've got some election integrity stuff in here, but then they're also creating an pre-registration for 16-year-olds process here. They're creating an early election day. Look, this is a very balanced bill. Is that how anyone in the media is going to report on this? No. So why do it?
So in other words, this bill is a lot of talk and no action, in part because it's so poorly written as to make it both potentially unconstitutional and unable to be implemented. Senate Bill 297 requires a canvasser from each party to be present during the county canvass, but with no enforcement mechanism to ensure that they are. So this means that party-appointed canvassers would be able to block the certification of an otherwise valid and legitimate election by simply not showing up to the canvass.
I don't think it actually says that. It doesn't say that the canvassers can't certify it. It says the party shall do it. If there is to be a sanction, it'd be against the parties, not against the canvassers.
Senate Bill 296 increases the chances of a canvassing board will fail to certify elections by enlarging them and requiring a supermajority vote to certify.
This is a pretty big stretch, folks. The bill says in large counties, if they're fairly big, like Kent County, Washtenaw, they have a 6-member board instead of a 4-member board. And if they're in Wayne or Oakland County, I think Macomb, it's an 8-member board. The real concern here is that if you don't have just 2 Republicans to gang up on, they might actually stick together. They almost had a problem with Wayne County's Board of Canvassers not certifying the election because they had problem after problem after problem after problem after problem with it. And only because they were able to threaten and bully and harass the 2 Republicans on the board that they made their certification under extreme duress.
Senate Bill 283 fails to act on the requests that clerks and I have made over 2 years now to apply ample time of pre-processing for absentee ballots. It only continues to provide 10 hours of pre-processing absentee ballots, which was proposed even though that proved insufficient last year. And the national best practice is 7 days. And Senate Majority Leader Shirkey and former Speaker Chatfield both admitted after last year's election that the 10-hour policy was insufficient and that more pre-processing time was needed.
Okay, the pre-processing time is a time to process applications when the public is not there to watch. And a campaign cannot be expected to have witnesses, staff, lawyers present for an entire 7-day period. And if they're going to have pre-processing, that's when signatures are verified. That's where the most likely element of absentee ballot fraud is protected against, is by having the public able to see that they're following the proper procedure. When I did the Oakland County Absentee Voter Counting Board training, we weren't trained to look at signatures, compare signatures, anything like that. They were just taking envelopes that were already opened, pulling the ballots out, unfolding them, and putting them in a stack. And that was it. And then feeding the stack into the machine. That was all they were doing. No, make it 7 days, she says. That way, you'll just have to be there on guard that entire time, everywhere that tabulation of absentee ballots is occurring.
It gets worse. Senate Bill 299 would require vote counting to stop and results be reported by noon the day after the election. Let me say that again. This bill would require all tabulation of valid votes to stop by noon on the day after the election.
Yeah, it should be done by election night. Tabulation of ballots at a polling place is done in about 1 hour. Absentee ballots, a few are received on election day. Most of them are received before election day. And you have the entire day to process those ballots. Why don't you just have absentee voter counting boards with a manageable number of ballots to be tabulated? Why does Detroit, with more than 500 precincts, have one location in the entire city to tabulate ballots? It makes no sense. Well, it's like the old saying, if the government was out to protect our rights and create prosperity, they couldn't be more incompetent. If they were out to deprive our liberty and to destroy our economy, they couldn't be more competent. There's a method here, folks.
Results reported at that time. Based on the language, it would seem that this needs to occur even if not all the valid votes had been counted by that time. Now, there are 11 other bills in this collection that serve as a deceitful distraction, window dressing, designed to make it look as though the package is somehow...
You said these were all terrible and undermine our democracy, but no, 11 other bills are window dressing, so they don't do anything. So you support them? Is that right? You support the other 11 bills?
Making it, quote, easier to vote. But it's not. Telling eligible citizens that they can pre-register at the age of 16, but then strictly limiting how they can do so is not really allowing for pre-registration of young voters. Allowing for 1 day of early voting on a Saturday weeks prior to the election, when most voters aren't paying attention, doesn't really provide for early voting in our state. Yeah,
voters weren't paying attention to the presidential race 10 days before the election, were they? Were they, guys? Were you all tuned out 10 days before election day? I mean, why was the media suppressing the story about Hunter Biden's laptop when nobody was paying attention 10 days before election day? But in all seriousness, folks, yeah, it is a really dangerous idea to have early election day. It's funny to see her attacking a policy that she would absolutely support if that was the only policy in the package. But anyway.
Now, this afternoon, I expect senators will also talk at length about bills to maintain the accuracy of the state's voter registration list. I completely support transparent, accurate maintenance of the voter list, as I've demonstrated through my actions by carrying out the most extensive list maintenance effort in our state's history.
Good, let's sign those bills. We'll get those bills to the governor's desk, and she'll sign them into law, and we don't need to have them in our proposal, because I don't want our proposal to be any more complicated than it needs to be. So, yeah, great. Thank you for endorsing those bills. We'll get those all done, and they will be out of the picture, and then a citizen-initiated law can focus on election reform.
We recently canceled more than 175,000 registrations, and we expect to place many thousands more on the...
After the election. after the election was when they canceled the registrations.
Countdown list. We've done this carefully, securely, and much of this was made possible by the absentee ballot application mailing our office conducted last year, which was the first statewide mailing to the list that had occurred in nearly a decade. Yet despite this...
Oh, that's why you mailed an application to every single registered voter in Michigan. It wasn't to get them to vote. It wasn't to get applications strewn all over the place to be snarfed up by who knows who. It was to verify your voting rolls, right? Because when they get to a bad address, the post office returns them with that yellow Nixie sticker on it that says they're no longer at that address. There's no other way to clean your rolls other than to mail out 8 million applications for an absentee ballot. Is that right? That's why you did it. How much postage did that cost to mail out 8,000 absentee ballot applications? That was to clean your voter rolls? Because I know ways to clean your voter rolls for, tell you what, let's say half of the postage it costs you to send those out, and I'll keep the difference if that's all right. How about that? There's other ways we can clean your voter rolls. All right. Let's move on. That is a brilliant explanation. That's how they clean voter rolls. They mail out en masse applications, and we'll just see whose applications come back as not living there anymore, if they come back as not living there anymore. And if they don't, well, then I guess we assume they do still live there. And if someone else got the application, well, who knows what they'll do with it, but that's not our problem, is it?
The Senate's bill package would ban such a mailing, which increased the accuracy of our voter registration list from ever happening again. Because as I said last week, what's happening behind the scenes is that Michigan legislators are participating in a national, coordinated, and highly partisan attempt to change the rules of democracy and make it harder for people to vote.
Should I pull up the Time story about the national coordinated effort to fortify the election? Maybe I should pull that one up. No, let's just keep going. Yeah, this is a vast right-wing conspiracy, guys. We are so highly coordinated, we're flying by the seat of our pants. But yes, that's what it is. It's a coordinated campaign of voter suppression. It would be funny, except it is serious.
Because they are unhappy with the results of last year's election. Today, we're also releasing graphics that compare the bills in this package to those that were enacted to great criticism in Georgia. We've seen nearly identical legislation also introduced in Florida, Arizona, Iowa, Texas, Montana, and Arkansas. They include legislation to limit drop boxes, restrict the right to vote by mail, and ban proactive distribution of absentee ballot applications and other educational information. To embark on this endeavor is not just un-American and anti-democratic.
Maybe the people who decide who our leaders will be should be people that can figure out how to vote. I'm just saying. I mean, I know it's a hot button topic about the question, for example, should felons be allowed to vote? Should felons be allowed to vote? In Michigan, they are, by the way, as long as they're not actually incarcerated at the time. Because that's what we want in a healthy democracy, is people convicted of breaking laws choosing who gets to make laws. And, I mean, those votes might count against the law-abiding citizens' votes, but, I mean, everyone's vote should count the same, right? What's the difference between whether you're a law-abiding citizen or a criminal? That seems totally fair and plausible and normal and not crazy.
It's an abdication of the oaths of office these leaders took to serve the people of this state.
No, it isn't, and you're abusing that by saying that. And people on both sides do this. If you're going to accuse someone of violating their oath of office, you better have the proof to back it up and not just saying you have a policy disagreement. And, folks, these days, words like this and worse are hurled around so casually. And frankly, the impeachment of Donald Trump did a lot to accelerate that process. That now people will blithely impeach leaders for maladministration because the precedent has been set. Pandora's box has been opened. Calling someone a racist is a hideous accusation. And these days, it's hurled about carelessly all the time, without regard for the damage that does to the targets and to the society in general. And it's gotten people on edge. It's gotten people fearful and someone's got to say we got to dial this back, and nobody wants to, and that's a problem that both sides have, but it's a problem that's worse on this side.
Because you don't serve the people of this state by silencing their voices. Instead, you embarrass all of us. So what comes next? I and the majority of leaders in various sectors throughout our state will continue to speak the truth to our voters and other leaders about the pernicious realities of this legislation. We're not going to be silent in light of this attempt to undo the people's will. But we will also
undo the people's will. How? You're talking about the Voters Not Politicians 2018, or is that the other one? The one that millions and millions of dollars of out-of-state money came in to tell Michigan how to change their election law, to change their constitution. None of which any of these bills challenge. None of them do. You still have a right to vote absentee. Just you have a process to follow. Like a process of voting on election day. Yeah, well, it's my right to vote. Why don't I have a right to vote from home? I don't have the right to vote by email. Why don't I have the right to let anybody I designate vote for me? Because we have integrity measures, we have protections, we have safeguards against the most obvious and the most obvious ways to abuse the system. And it's not like vote fraud is beyond the imagining of our society. It's not like we've never had an election in our history where someone tried to cheat before. No, that it's inconceivable that people competing for power, for the ability to spend and direct the spending of millions and billions and trillions of dollars, that have the ability to set foreign policy, that have the ability to have their names in the history books for all time. It's not like people would cheat to do that, is it? No. I mean, it's amazing how the politicians and the media have obscured the basic reality that elections are fundamentally and always an adversarial process. And that they're blithely allowed to say, anyone who says that our policies, which benefit incidentally only us, if that's the Democrats, that's all voter access. If it's the Republicans, that's all racism. It is patently absurd, illogical, and unfair.
We'll continue to provide an alternative path, one that is data-driven, nonpartisan, solution-oriented, and builds on the successes of 2020's elections. I announced my legislative agenda to advance the vote and protect democracy earlier this year. It's a nonpartisan package of proposals based on national best practices and the insights of election experts.
Nonpartisan.
It furthers the will Michigan voters demonstrated so clearly in 2018 when they voted overwhelmingly to enshrine expanded voting rights and options in our state constitution, and again in 2020 when they exercised those expanded rights.
How many of those reforms have been scientifically proven to benefit your party? Every single one. No kidding. No kidding. And here's the thing. It's okay for a policy to have a partisan impact. And parties often align on an issue based on how it goes to their political benefit. But there is a fundamental question of what's the actual consequences of the policy? I mean, we all get it, right? Immigration benefits Democrats, doesn't benefit Republicans, so Republicans aren't for it, except when they are because they're being paid by the Chamber of Commerce too. And Democrats do support it because, hey, more voters on our rolls. But there's the actual policy question, the underlying question that every citizen has to ask. Is more immigration good or bad? There's the actual question. What is the policy benefit of no reason absentee voting? Other than to expand absentee voting, which incidentally expands the ability for there to be fraud. So you wish they would just stop pretending that this is an honest debate about policy and not partisan hackery, which is all it is. That's all it's ever been. And again, yes, election integrity happens to benefit Republicans. The policy question is it good to have fair elections? Is it good to have elections that are robust and not susceptible to fraud? That's the question. That's the question the public has to decide.
Legislators have already introduced numerous bills that align with our positive, nonpartisan agenda, but Republican leadership has so far advanced very few of them. So it's my hope that as more and more leaders across the state denounce this poorly drafted, misguided legislative effort, they will change course and instead support legislation that aligns with the will of our state's voters, the principles of democracy, and the values of our nation. Now, I'm joined by several key leaders in our state today to underscore the problem.
I'm beating a dead horse here, so I'm just going to let it run and just move on. I think we're going to, well, let's see who's next. I think we're going to skip maybe Senator Bueno, but we'll see. We'll play it by ear. So now she's introducing Barb Byram, who's the clerk of Ingham County.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. I'm here today to stand in opposition to this package of bills being offered by the Senate Republican caucus that would strip voting rights away.
This is only going to be funny because she's a clerk and going to give us the clerk's perspective. Other than that, she's just going to be rehashing what Jocelyn Benson just said.
Access to the ballot box should not be either. For months, I attended numerous committee hearings in the State House and State Senate to offer my insight and expertise and experiences of county clerks throughout the state of Michigan. The goal was simple: to educate and inform the legislators of how safe and secure our process already is, and to offer some clear and simple changes that I and the election administrator community believed would improve our process. I attended these hearings in good faith because I believed that the legislators involved actually wished to make sensible process improvements. If these bills are the result of those hearings, then unfortunately, they were clearly not listening. Just last week, my colleagues and I from the Michigan Association of County Clerks Legislative Committee voted to oppose the majority of these bills because they do nothing to make our elections any safer or any more secure, but do everything to create hurdles and barriers to the ballot box.
No, they make more work for you. That's your problem. They make more work for you. And they make more people mad if you don't do your job properly.
A sensible reform would be to offer free and easily accessible identification for voters so that cost is not a barrier to voting.
Yeah, why should we have to check IDs? Why should we have to verify signatures? Do you know how much work that is? I mean, for our deputies, but you know, they're our friends. We don't want them to have more work.
Their license and send that along with the application for the absent voter ballot. Keeping in mind, these voters have already shown their identification previously, whether it was when they first registered to vote or when they voted in person. Owning a home copy machine should not be a barrier previously.
Let me hear that again.
And send that along with the application for the absent voter ballot. Keeping in mind, these voters have already shown their identification previously, whether it was when they first registered to vote.
Unless they registered online.
Or when they voted in person.
Which is not retained by the clerk for the next election 2 years later. Oh, they voted once before, therefore we can accept their identification forever. I mean, that's how that works, right? You voted all your life. Surely as the ballots keep coming in, on and on and on and on. I mean, we saw your ID once. I mean, IDs never expire. We don't need to ever check your ID again, not in the next election.
Owning a home copy machine should not be a barrier to voting.
Go to Kinko's. Email it to a friend, ask them to print it out. Or just go to the clerk's office. Just go to the clerk's office. That's the best way to vote anyway, to vote absentee. I wouldn't put my absentee ballot in the mail if I didn't have to. I don't. I deliver it to the clerk's office. Here you go. Did I do everything right? Yes, great, thank you. See, I've narrowed that chain of custody thing to not include the USPS. And everywhere in Michigan, your clerk office is not far away.
A sensible reform would be to allow clerks flexibility to make it easier to vote by absentee ballot. What these bills do is prohibit clerks from sending absent voter ballot applications, posting a link to sign up for an absentee ballot on their website, and sending ballots with prepaid return postage.
Why don't we just let private organizations run the elections altogether? That'd be so much less work for the clerks. If you just had Mark Zuckerberg just pay for all of their costs, I mean, they could just take a vacation from September through November.
That had us waiting for results for 4 days after.
Georgia, I agree. I think it'd be fine if the legislation said that a photo, like a picture photo could be emailed in, or even just writing down the number. That'd probably be okay.
To give voters more options to return their ballots.
But the important thing is that the actual voter has to identify themselves, because except in unusual cases of identity theft, the voter is in possession of the ID number, and someone intercepting a ballot, intercepting an application, acting as a third party to get their absentee ballots, doesn't have access to their state voter ID number or their state driver's license number or identification number. That's the point of requiring ID, so that the actual voter requests their ballot.
These bills indicate either a basic misunderstanding of the fundamentals of those suggestions or a willful, malicious intent to restrict access to the ballot. I thank you so much for the opportunity. It is my pleasure to introduce Senator Bueno.
We might skip ahead a little bit here, because if I recall, this part's really boring. It's a Democrat senator.
Thank you, Clerk Byram, Madam Secretary. I'm State Senator Paul Bueno, and as a former municipal clerk in Warren, I join my colleagues in opposition to these bills. As an elected official myself, I'd first like to state that lawmakers at all levels of government have an obligation to uphold our democratic principles by respecting the freedom to vote.
By the way, did you notice it didn't get kicked back to Benson to introduce the next guest? I'm going to introduce Byram. Byram's going to introduce Voino. Voino is going to introduce the next one, which is where it gets interesting. But the funny thing is, they're making clear how coordinated this whole thing is. This isn't like, now here's so-and-so, they're going to win with their opinion. I don't know what they're going to say. No, this was all scripted from start to finish. All right, yeah, this is really distracting. And yeah, this is all just the same stuff over again.
Access to vote.
Okay, here we go.
But even those colleagues.
Back up. Okay, here we are. Here's the guy to say the things that Benson didn't want to say herself.
Thank you so much, Wino, and thank you to Secretary for allowing me this moment to come to stand with many of my colleagues and to address many of you who are citizens not only of our city and our state of Michigan, but even those who might listen from across these United States concerning something that is very basic to us, and that is our voice is our vote. E pluribus unum, out of many one.
Oh, I just realized I messed up the
no matter who we are and where we are, we ought to be able to express the very basic human right, the very thing that all of us have and should share in common, and that is not only the right to vote, but the ability and the ease of access to vote. After historic
you know, I remember in the women's suffrage movement and history books, them talking about the women's right to vote. I don't remember ease of access being discussed. In fact, wasn't voting really hard back in those days? I think it kind of was. It was difficult. They didn't have a 6-week voting period back then.
Voter turnout last year. It is literally shocking and disgraceful that some of our state's elected officials who are here to serve the people would attempt to pass legislation that disenfranchises them.
It doesn't.
While millions of Michigan voters have made their voices clear, these bills seek to silence them. The people of this state deserve better, and we will continue to fight back until we win against this egregious effort that makes it more difficult and less safe to vote.
You mean like it was 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, 8 years, 10 years, 12 years ago? Who was complaining then? Who was complaining then? We had an election day. We had 3 weeks absentee voter period. Now we have a 6-week absentee voter period. Plus drop boxes. Plus, what else do we have? With the Senate Bill 300, we have some more ways to vote, but
Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, evil cannot permanently organize. It bears within it its own seeds of destruction. Mordecai Johnson said, evil is not capable of a perfect plan. As a not only minister of the gospel, but also a Black American citizen, All of my life, I have watched throughout all of the different generations born in the late 50s and coming up until now, ancestors as well as people who currently yet live and fight back against something that should be our right. I lived to see the 1964 Voting Rights Act that took place, and we thought that at that point that this fight would be over. I remember my parents and grandparents and others who breathed a sigh of relief then.
Yeah, and it was in 1965 when they were like, wait a minute, what about ballot drop boxes? That's what they were fighting for. They were, I mean, do you remember in the late 60s, the civil rights movement and how people were comparing signatures? I mean, this is a little silly, folks. This is a little silly.
To believe that we had this opportunity, yet to still be fighting this at an age that is beyond some of them. As I look now at my grandchildren and wonder, will they have the ease and the right to be able to share in this vote? Voting rights should not be something subject to an act or something subject to changing, that pre-clearances and things be changed. Federally, we need to change, and we need to bring in the John Lewis Act. We need to be able to make sure it becomes a permanent law. We need to take away the
Is the John Lewis Act H.R. 1? I honestly don't know. Does anybody in the chat know what the John Lewis Act is? I mean, I'm sure it's something that... Let me see if I can find here what the John Lewis Act is. H.R. 4. It's probably like H.R. 1, I'm guessing. Let's see. 117th Congress. Don't give it a bill number. Doesn't have a bill number yet. Okay. All right. I'm not going to waste the time of looking up exactly what the John Lewis Act is right now, but I'm...
Clearances that allow states like Georgia and other states to do this. This is not just a Michigan problem. 43 states all of a sudden have instituted this after this last election. Our President Biden, said this is similar to Jim Crow 2.0, and I agree.
It's obscene that he would say that. And you should probably be offended that he said that too. To compare the bloody racist violence of the Jim Crow era to, we need to make sure that voting is so easy that it's also easy to cheat. Because that's what their argument basically is. We need to create so many ways to vote that any and all of them can be exploited. That's what the argument is.
Minimizing access to vote, requiring more ID than it takes to buy a gun, taking away...
More ID than it takes to buy a gun. No, that is not what the Senate bills say, sir. I don't know if you've ever bought a gun before, but showing ID is the start of it. There's usually a lengthier process than just that.
Drop boxes in urban communities, stopping souls to the polls of people who would go to ease on Sundays when they have to work 6 days a week, requiring people to write in and ask for an absentee ballot.
Requiring they ask for an absentee, requiring people write in. As if there aren't organizations willing to help you write in. That's the other thing. Yeah, we're limiting third parties' ability to request absentee ballots. That's not the same as saying third parties can't help you request an absentee ballot.
And even refusing people who stand in long lines and hours to receive food and water.
No. That, first of all, nothing in Michigan's election law, nothing in the Senate bill says anything about that. That's a misrepresentation of what Georgia's law is, which is against handing out gifts to voters.
When they are waiting to vote is not only suppressive, it's not only anti-American, but it's anti-Bible. Matthew 25.
Anti-Bible. He went there, folks. Let's hear it.
Says Jesus, the Master himself, said, I was sick and you didn't visit me. I was naked and you didn't clothe me. I was in prison and you didn't visit me. I was hungry and thirsty and you gave me no food or drink. And I don't want it to be said that I stood in a line waiting to cast my vote, and you would not even entertain the opportunity nor give me food or drink to do so. When you do it to the least of these, he says, you do it unto me. And so I stand in the
hold on.
legacy of the no food or drink. And I don't visit me. I was naked and you didn't clothe me. I was in prison.
I was naked and you didn't clothe me.
And you didn't visit me. I
was in prison and you didn't visit me.
And thirsty and you gave me no food or drink. And I don't want it to.
I am pretty sure this is taken a little bit out of context to claim that a law against allowing people to be giving out gifts to voters in line at the polls is comparable to not clothing a naked person. Little bit of a stretch there. Little bit inappropriate.
Be said that I stood in a line waiting to cast my vote, and you would not even entertain the opportunity nor give me food or drink to do so. When you do it to the least of these, he says, you do it unto me. And so I stand in the legacy of those who have fought. And just like yesterday, when the verdict came down, finally people who were waiting to gasp for air finally could temporarily breathe free, but we can't breathe long because we got to continue the fight. We fought for the 15th Amendment that gave the right to vote to Black people, the 19th Amendment that gave the right to vote to women, the 24th Amendment that eliminated the poll tax, the 26th Amendment that dropped the voting age to 18. And here we are in 2021, in the midst of a pandemic, still having to fight. But yes, we will fight because we're determined to win, because we know God is on our side, right is on our side, and we will win this fight. Thank you so much for allowing me to stand and declare that righteousness will roll down and justice will roll down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. It is my joy and my pleasure to be able to say that even as we stood in Lansing, that we stood in this voter suppressive measure, and standing with us was the mayor of the city of Detroit. And it is my pleasure to introduce him now.
You guys want to help me out? Why do you think it is that Jocelyn Benson didn't make these arguments herself? I don't know. All right.
As he comes to close us out and share with us his convictions concerning this issue of the right to vote.
Mike Duggan's just going to go on and just say the same things over again.
To ensure every voter.
Okay, after Mike Duggan comes back to Benson, and now it's Q&A time. So let's hear how she responds to reporters' questions, and here's where it gets kind of fun.
Your question. Just a moment. We'll take the first question. Tim Skubik, please unmute yourself and ask your question.
If you guys don't know who Tim Skubik is, he's a political commentator on a lot of programs in Lansing. He's like one of the Lansing insider journalists. There's several. There's two journalist agencies, Merz and Gongwer, and there's also there's a radio station in Lansing. I can't remember the call sign right now, but they have a show in Lansing that specializes in talking to lawmakers, talking Lansing politics. So Tim Skubik is a Lansing Politico. So let's hear what his question is.
Madam Secretary, the popular wisdom in town is that even if these bills pass, the governor will veto them. So why are you staging news conference after news conference to fight something that you're going to lose but eventually win? Shouldn't you be focusing on a counter petition drive to beat what the Republicans want to do through the ballot and the petition drive instead?
Uh-oh. Hey, Jocelyn Benson, why are you having this news conference to talk about the Senate bills at all? Aren't they going to just be vetoed? Shouldn't you really be worried about a citizens-initiated law? Let's hear how she answers. Let's see if her poise takes a little bit of a hit here.
Thanks, Tim. I really like that question because it underscores what my role is as Secretary of State, which is to ensure every voter in the state is educated about their right to vote. As the chief educator of voters in this state, I have
the chief educator of voters in that state. Some nerve to claim that title, but no, you are the chief election administrator. Your job is to faithfully count the votes according to the state's policy. And I get it. You're a politician. You want to wait on policy, but calling yourself the chief voting educator, chief voter educator for the state of Michigan, I do not recall seeing that in the job description of the Secretary of State in the Constitution of Michigan, but here we go.
A responsibility to ensure, and that's what the release of the list of our analysis does today, to ensure that every citizen in this state knows what's happening in Lansing right now, knows what's been proposed in Lansing, knows that as they hear about these voter suppression efforts happening in other states as well, they've come to Michigan. And if it does reach a point where any of these proposals are
if it does reach a point where any of these proposals
presented to a citizen
for
a signature and endorsement, it's my responsibility to make sure, as I think everyone is, to
it's her responsibility. Stop right there. No, it's not. It is not your responsibility. That is not in your job description. Don't use your office's official resources to campaign. Yeah, issue advocacy, they can do that. Electioneering is something different.
that citizens know what they could potentially be signing.
What they could potentially be signing. There is no citizens initiated reform yet. We have kicked around some ideas, I think. But she's, what did Tim Skubik say? Inoculating? Inoculating. It's like what Todd Core said, inoculating the herd. Inoculating the herd.
So this is an education effort. This is an effort as well in the hopes that legislators will be reasonable and work with us. I would love for Michigan to be in line with states like Kentucky and Virginia and New Jersey, where secretaries of state and governors and legislators have worked together, followed the data, followed the truth.
I would love for them to just do the things I say
to improve our elections, because there's always more that we can do together to get there. But these proposals aren't that. And so I'm going to continue, as others have been, to educate others and to raise awareness about just what's being discussed in Lansing right now. And we know that this is really the beginning of this effort, that there may be policies that pass, there may be policies that find their way to the governor's desk, there may be policies that find their way to other ways to voters. And we'll see how that develops. And some of that is really outside of my role as Secretary of State, which is again to focus on protecting our democracy and speaking the truth about what we need, what our voters need, what our voters want to ensure, and what our clerks really have endorsed and called for to ensure that our democracy remains healthy and accessible and secure.
So you're really trying to inoculate the electorate against a potential petition drive. Is that a fair conclusion?
I called it early. This is where he said inoculate. All right, let's hear that again.
Endorsed and called for to ensure that our democracy remains healthy and accessible and secure.
So you're really trying to inoculate the electorate against a potential petition drive. Is that a fair conclusion?
Yes. Yes, that is exactly what she is doing.
No, I'm trying to educate everyone and raise awareness about these issues.
I'm not trying to inoculate the herd. I'm not trying to advocate for policy. I'm not trying to warn lawmakers to back off. I'm not trying to apply pressure. I'm just trying to educate people that these are just bad policies, folks. And also, by the way, I didn't say it, but that guy over there said this is all a bunch of racism, too.
Across our state, and let them know that these proposals, while some of them could even be determined to be, as I mentioned, somewhat cloaked in palatable language, that underneath all of them is a perniciousness that is un-American and anti-democratic. And so this is an effort to ensure that people are aware, that they're educated, and that leaders and those with platforms all throughout the state are aware as well, so that they can be informed in using their positions and platforms, as many of the guests who've joined me today have done, to speak out in opposition to this legislation.
She's sounding the alarm, folks. She's terrified. She's calling the cavalry. And that's really the takeaway of this news conference. Because we've talked for a while about different potential avenues for remedy and what we can do to prevent what happened in 2020 from happening in 2022. And people have kicked around a lot of different ideas. Ours was to have a citizen-initiated law. She is telegraphing. This is a frightening prospect because we can get the signatures and the legislature would pass the law. And the things that she did in 2020, like have no meaningful signature checks, like mailing out absentee ballot applications en masse, even to people that should not have been registered in the first place, just to see how many come back marked as not living there anymore, and anybody else that happened to grab them, do whatever with them. The things that she did in 2020 we don't want to let her to be able to do in 2022. Like impeding poll challengers, having no signature checks, allowing floods of unsolicited ballots to go out, allowing private financing of public elections, all of those things jeopardizing the integrity of the ballot. And she's going to call it racist. And if she doesn't call it racist, she'll find others to do her dirty work for her. And that's the way it's going to go. So again, folks, we had our meeting on Saturday talking about the latest draft. It's still an ongoing process. It's going to take some time to get the ducks in a row, to get the policy just right. But things are moving along. And the media knows it. The Democrats know it. And they're starting to prepare for it. So the good news is this means we're on the right track. It's like they say, when the Democrats are screaming mad at you, you know you're over the target. And that's what's happening here. So I've been going a long time. It's 9:15. This was an unplanned stream, but then I saw the conference this morning. Thought, we really got to weigh in on this, because this is the first sign of the politicians reacting to this project. And in politics, when you get your first reaction, you know you're getting somewhere. And the next reaction is going to be hostility. So things are moving along. And I haven't seen anything pop in the chat in a while. Ephesians 6:13 says, what was that Nancy Pelosi said about secretaries of state asking for funds? I'm not sure. I'm not familiar with that. But anyway, folks, it is a little bit late, and again, this was an unplanned stream. I think we've been through at least most of the news conference. I don't want to go through any more. So we're going to call it a night here, but Saturday we'll be back. We'll have another live stream. We'll maybe have more interaction. We'll talk more about grassroots leadership, because that's a major component of everything that we're trying to do at Rescue Michigan, is growing the movement to take back our liberty. So we're going to talk more about that this weekend. So thank you all for tuning in. I hope you had a good time going through this. It has been... in some ways, we're just setting the record straight on some of these issues, but I think it's also important to point out that this reaction really means we're starting to get somewhere, and that they're starting to realize that this is a problem for them. It is a problem that has legs. So